Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Centric. This being a show, it's about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season premiere of Jack Ryan. Great season premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So obviously I'm getting to this almost like, 2 months late, but either way, that's always the interesting thing, really quickly getting into it, like, the interesting thing about this espionage spy stuff, and you never quite know how it's all going to ultimately play out, how it's all going to fit together, because I did remember, because it has been a while since I saw the trailer, but I knew this season was going to be mainly Jack, kind of on his own with no CIA backing. Well, obviously this revolves around an operation that started in like the 60s. Basically, Russia was trying to make some nuclear weapons, and basically it's part of this like 7-day plan they had to basically, this is back when it was like just the USSR, yes, and they were going to expand their borders, but basically they had to kill the project because the technology wasn't where they needed it to be. But basically Jack ended up getting intel from someone, a woman named Zoya, that, hey, this operation is now active again all these years later. In fact, it's not just active. Russia's actually already built the weapon. So Jack wants to move on it, and he talks to Wright, Elizabeth Wright, and she's kind of not too convinced, because it's like, right, you kind of, basically it's like, you got a lot of hearsay. You got it from a source that we can't trust, because Zoya, as even Greer puts it, she likes to BS, but the fact is Jack trusts this intel. He knows that she's not lying, and now it's a thing of like, they can't really move on this intel until they get confirmation about it. So, and it's interesting, too, because they talking about it a little bit, but obviously now he's a case field worker in the field. Well, he's a case field worker. I don't think that's the position he would... Well, let's not forget he was working more specifically in in D.C. in the second season. So it is interesting, too, because Wright, she asked Greer about it later on, why Jack didn't use Greer as a reference, which Greer's like, yeah, he's always had issues with the fact of me being his boss. I wonder, is that all there is to it? Because it feels like there are some stuff we're missing in between season 2 and 3. I wonder, is it actually kind of like the timeline of what it was like real life? Obviously, season 2 was 2019, it's 2022 when the season dropped. So I'm wondering, like, is that time frame exist in the show, or is the show taking place relatively not as far away from the events of season 2. I don't know. Because she brought up the fact is you've been through 2 successful operations, the events of season 1, the events of season 2. Yeah, he doesn't want to reference you as like one of his references. So either something did go down between them. They still feel like they're in the ebb and flow of things. They're still in a good enough dynamic and everything, but the fact is that she said that makes me wonder, is there something more going on there? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it is just kind of like, yeah, Jack just having his issues with Greer, which we did catch up on him learning, yes, after like his health scare situations last season, he's kind of taking things slow, not trying to be back out in the field, meditating, eating right, giving up alcohol, bread, and stuff like that. And I love, at the same time this is all going down, obviously there's stuff between Russia and the Czech Republic. The Minister of Defense went to the Czech Republic. It was specifically for a football game, soccer. And the president she's meeting with, the president of the Czech Republic, President, was it Kovács, is meeting with him. And it's obviously... There's like a whole NATO situation of NATO wants to put like missiles in the Czech Republic, but obviously Russia sees that as kind of an act of aggression, but also at the same time, I did love how she played that, because it's supposed to be just a conversation between the two, but she brought in like reporters and news people all around to make it like, it kind of put him in a corner, because he can't do whatever he says now that it's kind of on a public forum stage, in the regard of people are going to be here taking pictures, videos, and recording this and putting it out there on the news. So you have to kind of watch what you have to say. Because she was specifically saying like, all right, like we'll consider like, refusing the whole, NATO putting like missiles here, but you have to basically back out of like your encroachment on like Ukraine, which obviously that was already happening. That the whole Russia-Ukraine thing already happened when this show originally was airing. Well, obviously it had been going on for a while at that point in time, but I wonder, is this spooling from some very specific story, or I don't think it's bleeding over into real life. I think maybe that just happened to be the story that they wrote, and that just kind of happened to play out like that. Or maybe it's, I mean, probably the Russia and Ukraine thing is, I mean, I'm ignorant on a lot of like international history, so I don't know how far back the Russia Ukraine thing goes. Like I'm sure that didn't just become like like this past year thing. I'm sure that existed well beforehand. So I wonder, is that what that was just kind of in reference to? Or was that pulling a little closer to real life? Like I said, that's my ignorance on the subject. So, but either way, she's trying to kind of force Russia's hand a little to kind of make them decide to back out of all that. Sadly, that situation didn't play out so well. Like the moment that lady was at the bar with the guy being like, oh yeah, I've got these tickets. I'm like, the fact is she randomly got these tickets and she just picks you out of anybody to go with. Like, oh, not like I'm going to invite someone I actually know. Like that was a little sus. And then like the moment he's like, oh my God, the way they're rolling up, I was like, oh, she's going to use you, isn't she? And it's like, yeah, she tases him. I'm like, what's this for? They end up assassinating the Russian Minister of Defense. And it's like, yeah, poor guy got, as the scapegoat. And the problem was they laid the gun on top of him, and the moment like one of President Kovac's like security people rolled up, he immediately shot him because he thought he was lifting up the gun and stuff. But immediately makes me go, he seems suspicious now, because it's like you immediately, I mean, I get it. You have to be quick on the draw. Last second, like, decisions have to be made. But they just made me suspicious of him, because, like, the fact is he immediately put the guy down. Like, but that's also the point. Like, they wanted him to be cut down and not have any questions. It's like, right, they look like they got their suspect, and maybe they won't look too deeply into it, because I doubt there's any security cameras that shows that he wasn't alone, that he arrived with someone in the passenger seat. But yeah, like they won't have a reason to look too much further into it, but maybe there's going to be some stuff later on, maybe specifically stuff related to Jack, or maybe someone else will investigate, being like, yeah, maybe there is something more to this. We'll have to wait to see. But obviously that complicates things with especially because like, right, it happened in the Czech Republic, and with everything with NATO too, I'm sure Russia might start kind of pushing and pulling at that, being like, hey, like this might have been a setup or something, or the fact is, how did this happen? You let this happen. Because I think it falls really badly on a particular country when there's an official from like another country is killed in your country. It makes you look worse, because it's like, right, not even that, hey, you might have let this happen because like you were in on it, but more so like you failed to do this, like you're kind of in, you end up catching some of the flack for it. So I'm curious to ultimately see how they end up spinning that. But so that ends up all going down, and because the last time we see the president of the Czech Republic in the episode, she's going to try and talk to the prime minister of Russia to potentially calm that down, because got word that like leaders from like France, Russia, and the US are like, what just happened? What's going on? So you got other, like, especially because they had her and the minister of defense in Russia were having that whole conversation about Czech being such a small country, and especially because it's like, oh, he specifically references like the 1980s Olympics or something. He's like, oh, do you remember how the US eventually ended up going up against Russia? And she was like, they beat the Czechs to be in that position, to be like the US and the Russia kind of, so kind of making a point of just like, oh, it's interesting that was a point then, and here we are now. And especially because they were making the whole point about, she was making specifically the point that the Czech Republic is a very small country, and it's caught between two powerhouses, Russia and the US. So, and for things to kind of be where they are now, it's just a complicated mess, and that's kind of the whole point. On the other side of things, Jack, the thing that he got, the SD card or whatever that he got from Zoya, it pinpointed the location of like potentially the nuclear materials for what the weapons. So him and a small squad gets to go ahead to like, all right, you're going to go investigate. No symbols or anything, so no one knows what government. Like, if you get caught, that's on you, and no government agency is going to, we're going to not even acknowledge your existence type of situation. So ultimately, Jack goes in with a team. They don't find nuclear materials. Instead, they find Yuri, a scientist who was working on the so-called project. That's the nuclear weapon and all that. So ultimately, he ends up. Luckily, they get Yuri out of there. They're supposed to meet up with some people from Greece to end up getting him like taken in because he wants asylum to tell what he wants to tell, and he ends up saying like, hey, I was working on this project for the past 4 years. What's interesting too is Greer is like, yo, like this guy has been like vetted. They've been looking into they've been recruiting this guy. They've had their eyes on him since he was in like junior high or high school, since he was like a junior in high school or something like that. But he's only been working on the project for the past 4 years, and they have like dealt with making this weapon hard to track, like infrared and stuff like that won't be able to track it. So, and it is all about that plan. So once again, something that went down in the 60s is alive and well now, and it's actually moving forward, because the whole point of it was like to destabilize close nations by like assassinating key figures and then kind of using like specific strikes of like a nuclear weapon to kind of make advancements easier. And so when they get to the beach and Jack's asking all these questions, people roll up. The entire squad that was there to help them immediately gets wiped. He luckily gets away with Yuri, but no, I get why Yuri didn't want to tell Jack anything, because he's like, I can't say anything. Asylum. It's like, I get it. You're afraid that if you tell Jack too much, he won't need you anymore, and he won't put forth 100% the effort to protect you. Now, if he still needs information from you, then he's going to not like kind of be lax in his protection of you. So I get it. It's your insurance policy to make sure you're kept alive and you get what you want in the end. But sadly, Yuri caught a bullet, and ultimately, I thought that was kind of wild. I mean, I guess Jack was kind of hoping that he would have been able to circle back to Yuri, because it's like, right, it's him versus like 3 armed people. I did think it was interesting. I was like, when that the police had arrived, I was like, one of those guys got out of a police car. I'm not crazy, right? I was like, that's definitely a police car. We even saw when they rode up on Jack and that guy, it's like, oh, at least 1 or 2 of them was wearing a police uniform. I'm like, oh, that's not good. So when it's all said and done, Yuri catches a bullet. But what I thought was interesting is before he caught the bullet, he told the guy, like, you traitors. So it seems like whatever's going on doesn't seem like everyone's on board of it. It does seem like there's maybe some dissension amongst like the Russian officials, and maybe somebody's kind of going off doing their own thing without letting other people know. Like, considering the whole, I could have sworn, maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe that guy called Yuri the traitor, but I thought Yuri called that guy the traitor, which I thought was so interesting. Jack ended up killing one of the guys that was dressed like a cop. So you're like, I mean, I'm probably not dressed like a cop, probably was a cop. So that sucks, but it puts Jack in this very compromised position, so that when he rolls up at the safe house, he goes looking around. I was like, what is he looking at? He's noticing people. Like, he's got a keen enough eye to be like, yeah, something's off here. So he talks to Wright, and it's like, he's like, what am I walking into? It's like, yeah, basically they thrown Jack under the bus, because it's like, hey, they said you came into the country illegally, you killed a Russian national, and you ended up killing one of their own. It's kind of how Grease is putting it. And he's like, wow, you're making me the fall guy in this, because the situation didn't go the way they were hoping it would, so they needed someone to take the fall, so it was going to be Jack. So they heard the news about how everything's playing out, how it was all set up and done the way it was, so it's like, all right, we have no choice at this point. Like, and the sad thing is, like, obviously, Greer had no idea about it, but it seems like, and even Wright said it was her choice, because the person they were taking orders from said, right, he's the one that left it up to her discretion, and she's the one that decided to burn Jack in this, which is sad too, because like Greer obviously went above and beyond, because she said that she knew that if this went sideways, she'd be the one that has to like essentially eat shit for it. So it is kind of a thing of, it isn't just self-preservation, it's also just kind of like the country deal of like, yeah, like we don't, because she even said it to Greer, your boy is putting himself in the middle of a very, very like volatile international situation already. And obviously, like with everything cascading down over the course of the episode, of course, it got even worse. So Jack's in a win because for him, it's like, I need to see this through. If I turn myself in, I'm just going to be the fall guy for this. We need someone out there because if I turn myself in, we're going to be in the dark about this weapon because the plan's already set forth. The fact is the Minister of Defense ended up getting killed. So Russia ended up getting killed, so we have to do something now. So I have to stay out in the dark, kind of be out there in the cold on his own. So, and like I said, I went into this remembering that being the overarching story this season. So, Jack's kind of on his own. Obviously, Greer's not too happy about this decision to turn against Jack. Especially I think even more so because he's the one that pushed to be like, no, Jack's the right guy for this job. And just because of other circumstances, it's come down to this. So it's definitely going to be interesting to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us. Obviously, we're getting like a very small picture into something. This is just the opening act. Once again, this is how it all plays out. And then like the nuclear weapon is supposed to be like the last catalyst in all of this. It's supposed to be the final shot. It's the last thing. So you're assuming because once again, it is this whole 7-day plan. It must mean you have at least 6 to 7 days to like figure that out. And so what that necessarily entails, what's going on, what players are working for who in this whole thing. Once again, it's the spycraft stuff, so you can never 100% trust anyone because you don't know 100% of whose allegiances are with what and who's working what schemes and who's behind what's going on. The guy that we saw like some Russian officials talking earlier on. This is like, oh yeah, like they were talking about the Minister of Defense from Russia going to talk to the president of the Czech Republic. There's a guy there being like, hey, he was making a whole comment about keeping your enemies close because it makes it that easier to slide in the knife. I didn't look with IMDb because I didn't want to know. I didn't want to end up spoiling something. But part of me wondered, I was like, do you think that's supposed to be the Luka guy? Because they made such a point of him with Sokol. Like they made such a point of like that interaction between him and Luka because Luka's the one that gave the orders to basically kill everyone when it came to that project because they needed more time. And it's just, I think it was more so like we can't let this fall into anyone else's hands type of situation. So those people had to be killed when the project was basically dead at that point. But now I wonder, because Luka and Sokol have like a really good relationship, so I'm wondering, because especially considering like that's what Luka called him, so and the fact is this project is known as that too. Like I said, I didn't look it up because I didn't want to know, but I feel like that guy was most likely. That's immediately where my brain went. I was like, that guy, that older guy that it's like, oh, like, I'm not like a government person. I shouldn't be giving you advice. But he's like, no, I'm asking for your advice because you're not a politician. And he was like, yeah, once again, the whole keep your enemies close so it makes it easier to slide the knife in. That's got to be Luka. We'll see if that ends up being the case. I'm going to try and once again avoid looking at that even in future episodes, but hopefully like they bring that up during the episodes so I can see if I'm right or not. But like I said, it's definitely going to be interesting to see what this season fully entails, where this story ultimately ends up taking us. Because even the trailer, like from what I can remember, other than the Jack stuff, it's like you still don't get a full, other than like the nuclear weapon angle of it, you don't get the full scale, obviously, of everything. So they've kept a lot of stuff close to the vest. Once again, it has been like over 2 months since I saw the trailer, so I could just be misremembering. But either way, we'll see what happens next. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.